All right. Hi, Dad.
Hi, Michael.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for taking some time to answer some cool questions about your life.
And thank you for driving all the way down here.
Love to.
You and Zuzu.
Yes. So thought maybe we could start off with a question about where you were born and where you grew up and your parents.
All right. I was born in Philadelphia and in a hospital actually in downtown Philly called Hahnemann Hospital, which I think is still there, on March 18, 1932, the day after St. Patty's Day. And my father's name was Thomas, and so they named me Thomas Patrick. He was Thomas Francis, and my grandfather was Thomas. So, anyway, uh,
Got a few Thomases there.
yes, yeah.
And how about your mom?
My mom was Bridget O'Donnell and grew up in Ireland. She was from a community called Donegal, or a part of Ireland called Donegal, and lived in a small town to the north and west of Ireland. And the home that she was born and raised in is still there. The farm is still owned by the O'Donnells,
Wow.
and it was a dairy farm when my mother was a child, when they raised cows for their milk. And in 1940, at the time of the war, the Second World War, they switched from raising the cows for their milk, they raised them for their calves.
Mm.
And that's what they do today still.
And so that's the O'Donnell name.
That's the O'Donnell name.
Oh, that's great. And it's in County Donegal?
It's in County Donegal.
Excellent. And how about your father? Which county was he
He's
from?
from Galway.
Galway, okay. And is there a particular city or do you know?
Yeah, it's like Garabunde
Oh, okay.
is the name of the city. And when we visited it in '96, the house that he grew up in was still there but not used. Uh, when his mother died, she was the remaining person, and when she died in 1948, he and his two brothers were the only survivors of that family, and they sold the farm to another person called Michael Lydon. And at the time I brought it up, and that was a relative or something, and he said no, it wasn't at all. So when we went both in '79 and again in '96, I met with Michael and talked to him, and he had a sister that lived kind of around the corner and down the road.
Wow.
And so she invited your mom and I in for tea, uh, and scone or whatever at the time. So yeah,
Wow. So they probably still have it today?
I would guess. I
Yeah.
have no idea. I think Michael has since died, and probably she too. They weren't kids when we were there, and so yeah.
Got it. And tell me a little bit about when did your mom and dad come over from Ireland to the Pennsylvania?
Well, I would say around 1923, 1924 is when they immigrated. I have uh, papers. I have my father's citizenship papers, and also my mother's. So it's on there when they immigrated. I know my mother has popped up because she came through a place called Ellis Island in New York.
Mm.
which is where all ships from overseas would land and go through customs or whatever. And so my mother, records show that she went through there.
Oh, got it. And she probably sailed out of Belfast, if I had to guess.
I know my dad came out of Cork,
Yeah. Okay.
and so I don't know about my mom. You're right; she could have gone across, but it that was during the Troubles times, the real trouble times, because that's about the time that the Ireland got split into two pieces, and so I don't know, to be honest.
Wow. And how did your parents meet?
Probably through their work. My dad was a chauffeur, and my mother was a nanny, and I would guess that they would have met through a working. I know that they were working for a family in Philadelphia at the time of their marriage, so I'm guessing that.
Okay. And they started dating, and next thing we know is
Who knows?
yeah.
Who knows?
Well, that's great. So, switching gears a little bit, I wanted to ask you a question about mom,
Well,
and tell me a story about when you and mom met.
ah, well, we were here in San Diego, of all places we met. And yet, I was here in the Navy. I had just in the process of finishing my cruise with the Navy, and your mom came out to look for work here in San Diego because she was troubled with asthma from when she was around 9 years old, childhood. And so people told her that the climate would be better for her here. So she came out with that in mind. Via kind of she flew first into Burbank, and then from Burbank she went to Phoenix, and from Phoenix she came to San Diego via friends. Go see this person, go see that person. So anyway, and I was stationed here on a ship, and I would stay overnight sometimes when I had a weekend off. I wouldn't go back to the ship. I would just stay here in the YMCA, and they would let us stay there for 50 cents a night. And so I would go to the Catholic Church, which was really the cathedral in downtown San Diego, St. Joseph's, and they had a youth group of young men and women, 18 to maybe 30 years of age, that were all single, and they would get together every Friday night for a dance. And as part of that group, they also did social things. They would go skiing, go to the beach parties, etc., as just young Catholic men and women. And so I went this Friday night, April the 17th, 1953. I had just been transferred off my ship to the naval station because the ship was getting ready to go to Alaska, and I wasn't. My enlistment would expire when I was in Alaska, and I told them I wasn't planning to re-enlist, so they sent me off to the shore station to get reassigned. So I went to the dance that night to kind of give the laugh to all the guys that are staying behind while I'm going home or going somewhere. And the decision was made I was going home. They were going to discharge me because my enlistment was up the 1st of August, and this was mid-April. So, uh, as part of the ritual at the dance, they had chairs set up and had kind of a meeting before the dance, and the dance was records, and so they talked about what they were going to do for partying, going to the beach or whatever they were going to be planning to do. And as part of the ritual, they asked anybody that was new to stand up and introduce themselves. And so this girl stood up and said that she was Dorothy Haggerty and she was there from Philadelphia. And I thought, wow, that's where I'm going back to. So I'll have to dance with her. So we danced, and we just kept dancing. We never separated once we started, and chatted and danced and so forth. Then they took a break and had soft drinks and coffee and tea and some kind of cupcakes or whatever, sweets. So we did that, and Dorothy went off to the bathroom. So she came back, and out of the blue, she says to me, "Is your dad a chauffeur?" And I'm thinking, yes, well, yes, he was. But how would she know that question? Or why would she ask that question? So I said, yeah. And so she said, well, did he know Dennis Haggerty? She said, that's my dad. I said, no, but I said, he used to work with Pat Haggerty. She says, that's my uncle. And so that began a 5-day kind of sojourn. We finished up the dance, and I took her home. She had rented a room with a nurse at Mercy Hospital, and that she had been referred to. And so I took her home, and then I met her the next morning, and we went downtown and went to lunch, and eventually we went to a movie, and the next day and so on. I think I had to stay on the base on Monday, and we spent Tuesday together, and then Wednesday is when I was catching the train to go home, and it was a 7 a.m. train, and so she came down to the station to say goodbye to me, and the guys were saying I wouldn't leave that. You're nuts. But anyway, I left, and then we continued to write, and she stayed for probably about 4 or 5 weeks into May, and then she couldn't find work here, because she worked in department stores in credit and collection in Philly, and she couldn't get employment here because she couldn't speak Spanish, and so she had exhausted her funds and caught the train and came home.
Got it. And then you guys reconnected?
And we reconnected. And at the time, I was living with my parents in Germantown, and she was moved back in with her parents in West Philly.
Wow. And then continued to date.
And we continued to date. It was a long haul between places.
Yeah, I'll say.
It was between West Philly and Germantown was probably a good half-hour drive.
Wow. Okay. Now, how long did you guys date before you?
Well, we started in May of 1953, and we dated till we got married in June of 54.
Okay.
And in the meantime, I wanted to go to school, and so I enrolled in classes in math at Temple University. They had a night school, so I had a job in the daytime, and at nighttime I would go to these classes, and I just took algebra and two years of algebra, two what would be high school years of algebra, and 1 year at Trig. And because I knew I wanted to be an engineer, and that I knew that math was important, that I didn't have junior algebra or trig in previous in high school, so I felt I should get those.
Oh, that's great. And that was the prerequisites you needed for Drexel?
Yeah, I don't know if it really was. If they ever said anything to me, it's just I knew I needed math,
Yeah.
and I needed to get it strengthened.
Oh, that's neat. Well, kind of sidetracking a little bit, maybe. How about in the Navy? I would love to hear maybe one of your favorite stories from when you were in the Navy.
I don't know what to make of that one.
Yeah.
It,
Were you in you were in Korea, in the waters in Korea, like during the war?
yes, yeah, yeah. Well, there's a story there. Um, I was on this little ship that was created in the Second World War. It was what they called an LCI, and later the Navy changed it to, that stood for Landing Craft Infantry. Later they changed it to Landing LSIL, Landing Ship Infantry Large. Yeah, now large is 150 feet long and 26 feet wide. That's not what you would think of as large, but anyway, and it was used to land a company of soldiers or Marines on a beach. It could ride up, it ran up on the beach and grounded itself. And on the way in, it would drop an anchor off the back of the ship. And then once the military got unloaded, then they'd pull on the anchor and pull themselves back off the beach and go back out. So in my time, when I got on the ship, it was in Guam, and this was in April of 1950. I had been to boot camp for 3 months, and then I went to engineman school for 3 months, and then went by ship from San Francisco to Guam. So I got aboard the ship. So then the Korean War started in June. I started in April, and in June the Korean War started. And then the Navy, prior to that, was going to get rid of the ship. They were going to typically decommission it and sell it. So they made a decision that instead they were going to turn it into a floating laboratory for medical epidemic control to use it down in the South Pacific for where diseases would pop up on an island. They could bring this little ship in with its doctors and labs and everything. So they sent us to Japan to get converted at a Japanese shipyard and get converted from what it was to this laboratory, etc. So we were there from beginning of October till beginning of February the next year. So whatever that 4 or 5 months that they did the conversion and everything. And so then we got sent to Korea. And when we arrived in Korea, there was a war going on between the North and the South, and the American soldiers and Marines were all fighting in it. Unbeknownst to people like me, there was a concern that the Chinese had entered into the war and in support of the North Koreans. And so, but the word had come that some of the Chinese were suffering from bubonic and dying from bubonic plague, which was a big disaster. So the government didn't inoculate us for bubonic plague. We got a lot of shots, but not that. So they needed to know, was that true or not true? And so spies had told them that there were bodies buried in North Korea that were dead of bubonic plague. So they put together a group of 6 or 7 I guess military guys, Navy, most of them Navy, I think all of them Navy, and an Army doctor, a brigadier general, which is high up in the military. I mean, it's like 4th down from the top general. And so he was an MD, and he was experiencing bubonic plague. So the decision was made to take our ship, put them on it, because we had the labs, and the purpose was they were going to go retrieve these bodies, bring them back to the ship, autopsy them, and know for sure whether that was bubonic plague or not. So we left the harbor in the beginning of March of 1951, and sailed north to Wonsan Harbor, which was in North Korea. And at the time, it was a big harbor. We had 4 destroyers in that harbor because Wonsan town was a railroad hub, and they wanted to disrupt railroad traffic to the south so that they couldn't reinforce, the Chinese or the North Koreans couldn't reinforce their troops. So these destroyers were sitting in the harbor just firing shells one after the other. They just rotate, and they just kept firing at them. And then sometimes they'd bring in bigger battleships and cruisers, big ships, and they'd sit outside the harbor and throw in big rockets at them and blow them up. Anyway, we got to the harbor. It was an overnight trip, and we got there, and then they transferred them the next evening to a boat to sneak ashore. And they had these 6 guys that were like Navy SEALs would be today, or Army Rangers kind of guys. And they all went in this boat with the doctor and went ashore. And then they spent the night there. And then I think, I don't know whether it was 1 night or 2 nights, but then they came back. And the doctor had determined that these bodies or persons had not died from bubonic plague, so they didn't bother to bring the bodies back. And they just, so they got back on our ship, got off the little boat, got back on the ship, and we headed back to South Korea. So that was my big war experience.
Wow. I've never heard that story. So originally they thought the bodies had bubonic plague, but they had to verify it, and the verification proved that they didn't.
Yeah, because he was an expert in it, I guess he could recognize it. But in the meantime, us on the ship all got bubonic plague shots. And it was a 2-shotter deal. You got one, and then a week later you get another one.
Well, I'm curious how the senior leader ended up getting bubonic plague. That you mentioned that did get it.
I'm sorry.
Didn't someone test positive for it?
No,
Okay, got it. So no cases of
no
it.
cases.
Wonderful. That's an interesting story.
All right.
GoPro, stop recording.